So, welcome everyone. I am delighted that you joined us for today's MTI Research Snaps webinar, Voices of Impact. This webinar is the fourth and last part in our Advancing Transportation Equity series, which explores transforming equity in transportation as we reflect on some of the most pressing issues of diversity and accessibility in the industry as a whole and how to overcome them. My name is Dr. Hillary Nixon, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. MTI leads three multi-university competitively selected consortia: the Mineta Consortium for Transportation Mobility, funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation; the California State University Transportation Consortium, funded by the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, otherwise known as California Senate Bill 1; and the Climate Change and Extreme Events Training and Research Program, funded by the Federal Railroad Administration. MTI's mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation system. Today's Research Snaps webinar highlights Voices and Impact, an oral history project focused on identifying how past planning practices have impacted communities of color. MTI partnered with the California Planning Roundtable on this film project to uplift the voices of people who ordinarily may be reluctant to share their stories, to raise public awareness, and to suggest how planning professionals and policymakers can change their practices in response. Joining us today is Miguel Angel Vazquez. Miguel serves as the president of the California Planning Roundtable. He is also the Health Equity Urban and Regional Planning at the Riverside University Health System. His role is to strengthen the integration of planning and health through collaboration with non-traditional partners. Thank you so much, Miguel, for joining us today. Before we continue, we would like to show you a clip from the project. In this clip, we will see Miguel interviewing Maria Cortez. Maria currently serves as the Community Outreach Assistant for Community Heights Development Corporation in San Diego, California. It is an organization that has worked to enhance the quality of life for residents of Community Heights by creating and sustaining quality, affordable housing and livable neighborhoods, and by fostering economic self-sufficiency. Forgive some of the sound quality in this video clip because there is a little bit of background noise, because the park where Maria is standing is located right over the I-15 freeway.
But look, this is what it's all about. We are the first covered park to have it built over the freeway. What a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride and joy. I take it as a community member. As I stated in the beginning, I've been here for 49 years, seen through the good times, the bad times, horrible times, great times. What I'm envisioning, and we, the community, envisioning the purple line trolley coming through. We, the community are not bad. We don't have anything against the developers. It's just that sometimes developers don't see the same visions that we have. And so what I'm doing is I'd like to take this moment to invite the developers to come out to the community, or even if it's through Zoom right now because of the pandemic. Invite the community through Zoom, and when you're able to hold meetings, invite the community to these meetings so that way you can see how we could work with you, because this is the community that we live in. You guys work for the community, but you actually don't live in the community. And this is my way of saying, come out and listen and hear about what we have to say, because we're not against you. We just want you to work with us. And in return, you will see that the community will work for you.
So during today's webinar, if you have any questions for our presenter, you can submit them through the chat feature or the Q&A feature in Zoom. We are recording this webinar, and the link to view it will be available shortly on our website, social media pages. We'll also make sure you all have the link to watch the full video itself. So Miguel, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Hillary and Alvarina on the background. Thanks for the invitation to share with your audience this project that we completed not too long ago at the California Planning Roundtable. We're very grateful for the support of the Mineta Transportation Institute because we were able to do this project with your financial contribution in the time that you spent on this. So today, I want to talk a little bit about the aspects that went into developing this film or video, if you want to call it that way. Essentially, we began this project as a result of the racial unrest that was happening soon after the pandemic started with the killing of George Floyd and others at the hands of police. And at the California Planning Roundtable, we decided to, I would say, address the issue internally by creating this video. Because as many of you know, planning has a lot to do with racial and social injustices. In many instances, planning and land use decisions contribute and have contributed and will probably continue to contribute to those injustices. So some of the aspects that we wanted to explore through the development of this film was to explore the idea of what is systemic discrimination and how people, community members, have been affected by that through, again, land use, planning decisions, and planning, but not only exploring the detriments of those harmful practices, but also finding ways from the stories of people who have been affected, how planning actually is a tool not only to mitigate, but also to prevent down the road continuing to discriminate and harm people based on the race, their gender, their age, and so on and so forth. But by and large, we were looking for stories that express how we as planners can understand our role in that process. So I want to share with you some of the key aspects of the process, and mainly because, as I mentioned before, this is a project that we've never done before, but some of our members had some experience in different aspects of developing this type of projects. So we obviously set out to work on our project statement and our objectives. All the documentation is actually provided in our website. We wanted to add a little bit of, well, I wouldn't say a little bit, but we wanted to add rigor to how we went about doing this project. So that we developed our guidelines, and part of developing the guidelines included how we were going to take different steps, like recruiting and selecting the people who we were going to be interviewing, creating our interview protocol, developing our film strategy, and going about doing the actual collection of stories. Next slide, please. The purpose of our guidelines was, from the get-go, we wanted to make sure that we targeted or that we developed this film to be educational in nature, We also provided general guidance in terms of the way in which we're going to be conducting the interviews. We included broad principles on how to actually conduct this film through UC Santa Cruz's and other sources to be able to do a, not what I would describe as an academic project, but a document that actually adhere to guidelines that are actually accepted for this type of project. And we wanted to make sure that it was not a discussion, not necessarily a dialogue between the interviewers and the people we were talking to. We wanted it to be an oral history project. In terms of our process, we developed our project design and goals, the guidelines that I mentioned. We were on a timeline to be able to deliver the project in I would say in record time, but the record time does not always happen, but we were able to achieve this in, I would say, a little more than a year. We developed our filming strategy and the technology that we were going to use, developed the script, conducted the interviews, and then we work on the portion of editing and post-production of the video. And I'm going to share a slide in a minute of the people who actually made this project happen. In terms of the selection criteria for the people we interviewed, we wanted to make sure that we had a geographic balance. As you will see when you watch the video, the individuals that we selected are actually all from California, and they also are from different race, ethnicity, gender, and age. One of the aspects that we wanted to also make sure we were doing was to include non-planners. However, one of our interviewees has a background in planning, which actually led to a very rich conversation on how she has been affected by planning and how she was able to connect her experience with the profession. We conducted a pre-screening process and then our pre-interviews, and we did a technical rehearsal on how we went about the interviews. In terms of the script, it includes statements that reinforce the purpose of the project. All of our interviews received a copy so that they would be aware of the kinds of questions that we were going to be asking, and we warned them about the kinds of protocols that we wanted to adhere ourselves to. And in terms of the interview technique, which is the next slide, we wanted to set the stage for how we were going to be meeting or interviewings. We wanted to set a very calming and reassuring setting. And we wanted them to think about their memories on how a particular planning project or a particular planning instance affected their lives. We used open-ended questions. We tried to minimize the type of jargon that we used, and that, in essence, gives you a sense of what went into developing this film. Next slide, please. And these are our two project managers. They were hired to develop the film. Manu Multani was the actual filmmaker and the person who assisted in contacting the interviewees, and Jocelyn Yee. She was the key point of person to work between the interviewees and the members of the California Planning Roundtable who participated in developing the actual interviews. And to close, this slide shows a discussion guide that goes along with the film, and the idea of this discussion guide is so that anyone who has an opportunity to view the film has a way to reflect on the questions and actually extract the meaning of the objectives that we set out when we develop this project. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions. So Hillary, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Absolutely. So thank you, Miguel. And for all of you, we've had a chance to hear from Miguel a little bit about how California Planning Roundtable went about creating the video. We saw a small clip from an interview with Maria. The discussion guide that Miguel mentioned will be something that we share with all of you when we send out the recording from today's webinar. But if you have any specific questions you want to get into the discussion, please feel free to share them through the Q&A or the chat. We do have a couple of questions that were submitted earlier, Miguel, that I think we could use to kind of start the discussion going, which I think will be the most interesting part of this conversation. So you've been a longtime planner, and you've worked with a lot of individuals from various different communities. So how did your role as an interviewer with this project influence your role as a planner? Did the experiences that you heard and talked about with folks like Maria surprise you? How did they affect you?
Yeah, I conducted 2 interviews. In the one with Maria, for instance, was an hour and a half, I think, and the second was almost an hour. And when I did the interviews, it was a very different sort of interaction that I had with a community member, because I do a lot of work with community members and I get to know them one-on-one. With some people, I interact with them more than once. But what this project did for me in particular as an interviewer was that it gave me really a very focused charge of what I wanted to learn from Maria. And as a result of that, I just listened. I mean, if you watch because we have the film, which is about 30 minutes, but we also provide each individual interview. If you look at my interview or either one of my 2 interviews, you will notice that I didn't say much. I mean, I really wanted to get into the dialogue, but they were just expressing a lot of ideas and memories, sharing their memories. And I think for me, that was an important lesson, listen more, talk less. But I had an agenda, I had some questions, and they addressed them all. But the other thing is that they explore other things that were not necessarily focused on the question, but they were part of the context, and that was a really important and new experience for me.
No, I hear you when you talk about the value of listening. A lot of times we're trained as planners, with really good intentions, and sometimes good intentions can go very, very badly. And that if you take the time to listen, to engage, to understand what our community members are telling us, particularly community members who have been disproportionately disadvantaged by some of the past and even current decision making. So you mentioned that you interviewed 2 individuals Maria as well as Rosina. What do you think that they had in common with each other, with some of the other individuals who were interviewed and featured in this project? And kind of what stood out to you about their collective experiences as regular members of our community being impacted by planning processes and decisions?
Yeah, so I think we are all community members, right? All of us live somewhere, so we are part of a community. And all of us play different roles within our communities. All of our communities have issues. And sometimes we think about the issues. Sometimes we do things about the issues. Sometimes we don't. So there's a difference between those community members who are passive and those who are active. Now, no community member is active from the get-go. People become active from being passive because there may be an issue or an opportunity to make a difference in their community. And I think I sort of saw that. I think we all are aware of that, but interviewing both of them and responding to this question, they both had at some point in their lives a reason to become who they are today, leaders in their community. But they were just regular people. You know, they would go to a community meeting because they were interested on a particular issue. And as they made their presence there, I guess the issue started pulling them in, and they wanted to follow. They found a place, they found their voice, and they found support from people around them. So I think that's leadership is the common denominator that both of them have. Leadership to act, not to be watching and being passive. They have this beautiful energy to improve their communities.
I think that the comment that you made about there's often that point, there's a development that takes place, there's a decision that is made, there's a change in the community, something happens that is kind of the triggering point for really folks sometimes wanting to get involved. So thinking about that idea, what advice, because I think I'd like to, as a planner myself, as someone who educates future planners, I want to make sure that we can engage and hear from community members much early on. So it's not as a reaction to something that has happened to them, but moreover, how do we engage from a much earlier stage? So what advice would you give for planners when it comes to listening to community members, as you've done in this project and as you do in your own work, and then for implementing what you might learn from those experiences that you hear about from the community members?
I think it's important to be intentional about number one, you need to know why you want to learn from people. I think you have to have a reason. And once you find your reason, again, within the planning context, is it because it's about your community, or is it because of a project that you're working on, or something you're interested in, whatever that is. Once you establish that, then you are ready to be then intentional about who you want to talk to. And it's okay to talk to strangers. I learned this, I guess, throughout my career. Sometimes strangers reach out to me, or sometimes I'm curious about somebody who I have never met. And, I've been able to communicate with people through that process, through the unknown, because I have a why. And when you are able to explain the reason why you want to talk to a person, they will engage with you. So that idea of not being afraid of talking to a stranger is really important, because we're all people. So anyone, listening in, they can reach out to me and I will respond. I may not respond right away, but eventually I would. So take that that approach, and then how to codify your interaction with somebody. I think that part of reflecting on our work as planners is part of that. And in this case, reflecting about what is it that you talked about. I think it's important to, if you want to take it to the point of writing things down, or what sort of things you learn from this individual as a result of your conversation, can help you inform your current thinking or your future thinking. It's really important to sort of always remember, those things that we capture from people that are really, really important, because then you'll be able to use that, as part of your own toolkit, if you will.
Yeah, I certainly think that myself as a planning educator, I often talk with my students about you're often, well, not often, but many cases, you're a professional who's working in a community, but you aren't necessarily living in that community. So how do you spend more time boots on the ground, sitting in coffee shops, talking to residents, attending community meetings, really drawing out what are the major concerns? Knowing, we had a question about kind of how do you partner better with community-based organizations? And I think it really is about putting yourself out there, making them know that you're available to listen and to try and kind of how do we move forward? So we heard a little bit with Maria where she talked about kind of her experiences working with the developer. And as someone who's passionate about transportation, I live and breathe in the transportation world. We did have a question about kind of the roles of public transportation, transit agencies. And I'm wondering, Miguel, if you remember from the interviews, were there any kind of key insights from some of the interviewees about public transportation and accessibility and kind of the role that public transit can play in terms of improving lives for our community members?
Yeah, the only thing that I can remember actually was from Maria. So she works for the City Heights Community Development Corporation, and that's a CBO. In this community-based organization, they work on many different planning issues, including active transportation. One of the things that she said was that she was working with some of the youngsters in the community to work with the local transit agency to make the bus ride free for anybody under 18 years old. And I believe they were successful in that campaign. I think it was almost like a pilot project, but I think now it's permanent. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what happened. Because last year when we invited Maria to speak about her experience on this at the National Conference of the American Planning Association in San Diego, that same day she had to go from our session because she needed to celebrate something big related to this project with the youth and the transit agency.
Now, thank you for sharing that specific example. In fact, actually, as you talked about free fare transit, MTI has a recent research perspective piece about fare-free transit. So I do realize that our 30 minutes flew by faster than I thought it would. It always does. So we'll wrap up here. I do know, folks, please, for those in the audience, please take the time to see the full video. It's a 30-minute long video, plus we do have available the links to the full interviews. They're powerful. They're thought-provoking. We will also be sharing the research guide. One of the questions that was posed was, how did partnering with CPR the California Planning Roundtable on this film influenced the research agenda for MTI. And interestingly, I think what we're doing is making equity a far more intentional part of our research practice and our research projects. We recently were awarded a research grant from the US Department of Transportation. And as we worked on that research proposal, equity itself was really not just woven, was made a fundamental component of all that we do, whether it is research, education, workforce development. And then I think the other key value is rather than, I think a lot of times research happens to community members, it happens in communities, but it doesn't often happen with communities. So how can we as a research center do a better job of doing research with community members? So bringing them into the table, making sure they're fairly compensated for their time, their energy, their expertise as being partners on research. So Miguel, thank you for joining us. We've got the final, the link to the video available, and we'll also be sharing some more information with everyone. And then one last moment before we go. So please do join us next month as we celebrate Women's History Month. In partnership with the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, we are hosting a conversation with a panel of women transportation leaders representing academia, public and private industries, and the nonprofit sectors as they share personal stories from their careers and lessons learned as they rose to the top. The event will be moderated by April Ray, who is the Chief Executive Officer of COMTO, the Conference of Minority Transportation Issues, and officials, and a member of the MTI Board of Trustees. So thank you again, everyone, and we appreciate your time.